Hello and welcome to Inflection Point Conversations. I'm Michelle Obeda, an art director and 3D artist. In this podcast series, I'll be interviewing experts in the fields of art, architecture, and visualization. Together, we'll take a deep dive into the disruptive topics that have reached an inflection point in our industry. If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe. You can also comment, give feedback. I'd love to reach more people and grow this community. Today, I'm talking with Kitae Kim. Kitae Kim is an experiential architect and co-founder of Foveate, a collaborative 3D platform for creative professionals in architecture and experiential art to communicate their spatial ideas to anyone. Before Foveate, Kitae was the experiential architect at the studio of the media artist Rafael Lozano Hema, where he designed, visualized, and programmed various interactive artworks and immersive exhibitions. Welcome, Kitae.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We met a few weeks ago at this event in New York,
That's right.
the Pechakucha, and yeah, it was really interesting. I found it really cool to, I guess, meet someone who's doing visualization that's slightly different and that's about the experiential art part of that. And yeah, it's really interesting. I'd love to ask you, first of all, for anyone who doesn't know, what is an experiential architect?
Yes, so an experiential architect is basically a designer who designs experiences, usually location-based, interactive, and temporary or touring. They can be permanent, but typically they aren't. And think about them like a mix of tech and physical spatial design, but mixed at an architectural scale. So
Mm.
projectors, LED walls, interactive elements that people can come into a space, and it's more about having them kind of interact with technology in the space in a new way rather than just it being static like pure architecture.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. And you studied architecture, didn't you?
I did. I studied architecture at the University of Michigan, but I
Hmm.
actually started off in art, specifically media art and spatial design. And then
Oh,
the architecture school in Michigan was just one floor above the art school in the same building.
yeah.
So I ended up just transferring and switching over about halfway through. And I
Oh,
just moved
that's really
upstairs.
cool. Oh, that's great. So you came to architecture from the sort of art and spatial design space.
Yes.
And well, I was going to ask you what drew you into visualization, but I suppose did you start from that point of view?
Yes, for me, I always thought that visualizing something as closely as possible just kind of helped me concept it. I was really into drawing and sculpture and kind of the more classic art making mediums. Um, when I was in high school and middle school and stuff like that. And then as I got older, I started to get more into technology, more into different software because found out about Photoshop. I found out about different 3D apps like Blender. And this is back when like Blender, was right click to select. And so
Hmm.
it was like super hard to learn stuff like Touch Designer. But I all like investigated that when I was in high school, and then kind of knew that I wanted to get into more experiential stuff as an art making and installations, but I didn't know what it was called. And I didn't realize that starting off with an architecture background would help you do that kind of stuff. And I
Yeah.
kind of realized that halfway through college.
Yeah, that's really cool. I also didn't know that there was a name for that. Like I've heard it being called like exhibition design, which might be slightly different. Um, did you always love exhibitions? I mean, it sounds a bit like that would be one of the perfect ways for you to have like seen these kind of experiences.
Yes, I always loved them. And I used to go to a lot of museums when I was a kid. And, especially the kind of rotating exhibitions that would happen is always interesting to see, like, oh, what did they build? Like, what is this thing? I grew up in Boston. We had a really good science museum, and they had some very cool exhibitions.
Mm,
And it didn't really, like, hit me at the time that somebody was in charge of actually designing these things.
mm,
I think it just had a big impact on me and just kind of space in general. But I was always interested in media and technology and graphics, and it kind of just happened that experiential design was this kind of new medium that was happening. I mean, I,
yeah.
I say new because technology didn't really seep its way into it until I'd say the last like 20 years, where
Hmm.
media and architecture have really been able to cross together, and there's been an ability for that to be kind of like shown to the public.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And that's really cool that that you grew up near. like a really cool museum and art gallery, I feel like that definitely influences what you think like you want to do
For
as a
sure.
job. So you worked for almost 5 years as an experiential architect for Rafael Lozano Hema. What kind of
Mhm.
work did you do there?
Yeah, so Rafa is a media artist. The studio when I joined was about 8 people, but Rafa's work has always been extremely interactive. He's been working a long time, so like, since like the 80s and 90s, making these massive installations. One of his big pieces was in Mexico City at Zocalo Square. It was a series of searchlights on top of the public square, and people could log in on the internet and be able to control where all the lights were looking. So Rafa
Wow, that's
actually
cool.
yeah, so it's a very early example of like internet connected, interactive art from anywhere in the world in a public space, and it's all about participatory design and people in the city. How can they make themselves present and known and have agency over, a city, over where they live, their community? So a lot of his art is like that, and he actually came to speak at the University of Michigan as part of our artist lecture series, which is called the Penny Stamps Lecture Series. So I saw his work at that lecture. I think that was like my sophomore year or something, or maybe my junior year. And then I think we like briefly like met while he was exiting, just like a quick hi and hello. I kind of forgot about his work until I was doing my thesis at
Mm.
Michigan, and it was very kind of experiential and all about how can a kind of invisible group of people be able to represent themselves in a city without exposing themselves. So I was referencing a lot of his essays called
Mm.
Relational Architecture at the time. And then when I was finally graduating, I was applying to jobs. I was like, dang, I don't think I'm going to make it like, at a corporate firm. Just doesn't seem like it's suited to my skill set and like what I'm interested in. So I ended up writing him a cold email about Brexit. I got his email from the studio lecture
Hmm.
director. I just wrote him an email about Brexit because I knew he was very socially minded, and it's something that was so present at the time. Like it was kind of like this cloud that was looming over everybody. And I told him, I think we have very similar values, and your work is super architectural, has lots of media. But it doesn't seem like you have an architect or someone who can help you, design these things from that background.
Yeah.
And I ended up being right. And he kind of ignored the email for a couple of weeks because they were on vacation. And I didn't know it. But then
Mm.
he came back and I responded. He was like, "This was a super weird email, but I think we should meet."
That's a great story. That's so
uh,
cool. That's like very bold.
uh. So you never know what happens when you just kind of stick yourself out there. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like did you feel, I mean, you must have learned a lot working there since he is already a very experienced artist.
oh yeah, I mean, just being exposed to that level of art making was wild. I mean, we'd work on installations that are absolutely massive that have like 20 artworks in them, and the artworks in them are not small. They're not like paintings. They're, let's say a room full of, this is what he did for the Venice Biennale. It was like he was represented at the Mexico Pavilion. It's a room full of, I think, 400 light bulbs all hanging from the ceiling.
Hmm.
And there's a little stanchion at the front. It's a cardiac sensor like you would have at the gym on the treadmill. When you
Hmm.
put your hands on it, all the light bulbs in the room start pulsing with your
Hmm.
heartbeat. And then after you get off, your heartbeat becomes a single light bulb, and all the other 399 or the other 399 people before you. So
Hmm.
then, as somebody new comes on, then the first one leaves. So being exposed to artwork like that and like learning how that's actually put together was super interesting, just on like a technical level. But then
Hmm.
on the kind of more on the business or design side, it's like, well, how do you actually produce these artworks? Like, how do you pitch these and get them built? So when I joined Rafa Studio, because there wasn't an architect, I kind of like took over that pre-production side of how do you concept these? How do you explain them to other people?
Hmm.
How do you get money from the investors, collectors, institutions to go actually do this stuff?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I cut my teeth on. And it was funny because they didn't have someone like me specifically doing that beforehand. I kind of got to create that workflow. So my whole first year, I just only did proposals and presentations, trying to explain new artworks we were making, pitching old work for new sites, new museums, new public areas. So that's where I really got into visualization, and I had the
Mm.
freedom to pick, oh, here's the tool set that we should use to explain these artworks, because no
Yeah.
one had tried to do that before.
Yeah, and that's where you took it into sort of VR in real time.
Hmm. So basically, we started off doing a lot of Photoshop, like kind of let's do Rhino renders or Keyshot or maybe V-Ray, and then take them to Photoshop, comp them out, and then submit, a series of boards for these pitches and proposals. And, you can make them so realistic when you do it that way. But the problem is the artworks are all interactive, right? So to be able to explain, oh, this wall is going to write text out of fog as you speak into this microphone, you can't really explain that with a series of boards, right? I mean, you can try, but it doesn't really get it across.
Hmm.
But when you can render it into real time, and especially when you can go fly to the client with a VR headset and a computer. And this was way back in 2016, 17 that we were doing this. It was Unreal 4.12, I want to say, is where we started.
Hmm.
And then I would go fly with a computer with like a GTX 1080 and a Vive headset, and then go give them the VR tour, and they could go see, how they would interact with the artwork, how they would, speak into this microphone. The text would get written in the fog, and it would just appear, and they just understood it, right? And the
Yeah.
level of fidelity is not as high as like a Photoshop render in terms
Mm.
of like, how
Realism.
photoreal it is, right?
Hmm.
But it's more realistic in how one actually interacts with it. So it imbues a better understanding than just the visuals alone could.
Yeah, absolutely. What was your experience with people receiving the VR sort of tour with the headset and stuff? Like, did you find people got it really quickly, or did they need like sort of take some convincing?
It's funny because when I was always interested in VR, when VR first, the Oculus DK2 first came out, it came to Michigan, and we have a special library called the Duderstat Library, affectionately nicknamed the Dude, that all the institutions like creative colleges like art, architecture, music, engineering, they share. So we had a center in it where there was a bunch of new technology, and we had the Oculus TK2 headsets. And I remember going there and trying it, being like, "Oh my God, this is the future! Like, how could we not use this for architecture, right? It's
Mm.
like you can just understand space so fully." But the problem is you have all this gear with you, like a linked headset with a cable that goes to this crazy computer, and it takes all this work to set up, and it was expensive.
Mm.
So convincing Rafa in the beginning to actually purchase this was a lot. But luckily he's super open-minded, very open to new tech, of course. And when you explain the benefits, and then you actually get to try it, it's a world of difference, right? It's as close to reality as possible.
Yeah.
But of course, getting someone into a headset easily is still, even today, a challenge. Like there's so much setup involved.
Yes, yes. I had a very similar experience. Like when I first tried something in VR, it was with the Oculus, and it was very early days, and I thought this is, I was working for an ArcViz company, and I thought this is how visualization should be, and I came from a video game background, which kind of,
Yeah.
made a lot of sense to understand space. But the journey to sort of I guess I feel like people needed convincing. Some people saw it straight away. Yeah, I can understand this. And some people need a lot of convincing. And especially when you're taking the headset and the laptop and all the wires to a client and you're setting it up and getting them to put on, a headset and walk around where they can't see where they are. I felt like it was 50-50 in terms
Yeah,
of people's
not
reception of
sexy.
it. Yeah, which was such a shame because the potential was so great there. But I mean, that was probably different clients to, I guess, the exhibition, designing for the artwork. So I'm wondering if they're maybe a bit more open to it.
Yeah, I think it depends. And like you're saying, when we first started experimenting, we did that too, where we give people the controllers and they could look around, move around. We actually found that that was bad for us because people could too easily get lost, like run into walls, not know how to
Mm.
turn. So we actually ended up doing was always putting them in like a rolling chair, like a one that can rotate, and
Hmm.
then creating kind of like a roller coaster, like fixed rails.
Mm.
Ride for them to take inside of the VR experience. So they could turn their head, look around, look up and down, and we would mirror what they're seeing on a screen and tell them what to look at. Be like, oh, turn your
Mm.
head a little bit to the left, to the right. So it gave them kind of all the spatial awareness that they would get from using the VR headset, but on a very curated tour. So
Yeah.
they don't have too much freedom for them to get lost and kind of mess it up. Because, we made so many errors like that just testing it internally with our other team members that we realized, oh, for clients and high stakes presentations, you really need to hold their hand. It's kind of like if you're using a slide deck or something, you're not giving them the control to go to the next slide. You're the one doing it, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of the very same idea, but how do you apply that to 3D or how do you apply that to VR?
Yeah, that's really smart. I didn't really think about that. The way that you can control it with like a roller coaster rail. That's a really good example.
And we would
Oh
actually
yeah.
like physically spin their chair sometimes too. So if we want them to look at something, they're in the headset so they can't see. We'll just like very subtly like turn them a little bit and they'll be like, oh, okay, I see this detail.
Yeah, and that's great because then I like what you said about, mirroring the screen, then you can they could feel like you're there because you're telling them where to look. Like I actually wonder about that with the experiential design, the like designing these experiences, the person who's doing it, like the first person, I guess, is the one interacting. And then have you designed social interacting, like multiple people interacting with the same thing? I mean, I've tried things like that before. Has that played a part in your
Yes, we've had so many pieces ranging from really small, micro scale to absolutely massive. And we did one for the Manchester International Festival a couple of years ago. That was a whole venue made of like 50 shipping containers that had multiple artworks in it, and they could all track you in space. And you could interact with different artworks at the same time. And then there was this one piece called Zoom Pavilion that has all these infrared cameras, and they track everybody in the space and they try to draw kind of relationships between people. So that one is super social, and it's kind of interrogating, the surveillance state and how algorithms can associate people who, maybe are not associated at all, but they kind of create
Mm.
these fake connections.
Mm.
So, social interaction and multi user participatory design was a big part of the studio. Of course, many of the artworks, they are, kind of intimate and they require one person at a time to interact with them. But there were others that were, much more social in that way, where multiple
Mm.
people in it, especially like the shadow play artworks that were like projectors that would take your shadow and your shadow would, move things on a projection. We had 20 people could be in those, or as many people as could fill the space, and they all affect one another. So
Mm.
there are definitely ones that were more social as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's cool. So 3 years ago, you co-founded the company Foveate. Foveate? Can you tell me something about it? What is the company?
Sure. So Foveate is a online collaborative 3D presentation platform for architects and designers, mostly geared towards experiential right now. And kind of the idea was born out of the COVID realization that we have all of this technology and power to render in 3D very realistically. Like even, Unreal 5 now is so realistic. Like if you know what you're doing, you can make it photoreal. Like people are like, okay, I get it, especially on, really high-end hardware. But during COVID, I realized if I can't travel with a computer to the client and show them it side by side, or put them in a VR headset, or set up a complicated like pixel streaming app and try to teach them how to use it, it's really hard to actually communicate a 3D or spatial idea. There's not a way that I know exactly what you're looking at as if we were sitting next to one another,
Mm-hmm.
or where it updates in real time. Like we can screen share, but it's always choppy and it's never that good. And it kind of made me realize we don't really have a tool set as spatial designers to communicate space remotely. And then there needs to be a way that we can do this. When we were in Montreal during the lockdowns, it was very strict there. You could not leave your apartment. It was like really intense.
Yeah.
But we had to deliver all these installations remotely. And I remember trying to screen share with our partners in New York, UAP company. They're an arts fabrication company. And we were working on this custom fabricated metallic tree. We were trying to talk about how one specific branch from the tree was not going to work because of some joinery issues or cabling that wouldn't fit. And we took us like 2 weeks to just talk about this one branch, sending Rhino files back and forth, trying to highlight it and trying to like get on the phone, screen share, all this different stuff. And it made me realize there's got to be an easier way to just upload a 3D model that we all
Yeah.
use and be able to invite people to it and all look at the same thing together.
Yeah.
So that's what Foveate is. Foveate is what kind of like Google Slides, but for 3D, where multiple people can all be in one 3D scene, upload all their 3D video, image, audio content and be able to annotate different 3D points of view in space, which we call moments, and then be able to trigger media in them. So whether that's an audio clip, a video, they can communicate a very complex idea very simply in a way that anyone can understand, that they don't need to have a complicated app. They don't need a crazy computer. They just have to open a link, just like Google Slides, and then use it just like a slide deck. So there's a
Yeah.
play button and arrow keys. It's kind of the idea is the people who benefit the most from 3D visualization are the people who have the least technical knowledge and the least ability to actually use a 3D app. So
Yeah.
they need something that they're used to. So I think for most, C-suite people, that's PowerPoint. So Foveate is essentially 3D PowerPoint on the web in a way that hopefully, like, your mom could use. You could just send
Yeah.
her a link to a Foveate scene. She could press play and be able to go through all these spatially annotated scenes and people to understand, oh, this is the kitchen I'm getting remodeled. This
Yeah.
is the event I'm going to go to, the concert. This is a museum exhibition we're designing, what have you.
Yeah. Very cool. And is one of the main points of it for meetings, for communicating sort of pre-viz idea, or is the platform also meant to be for the performance
Yeah,
aspect?
so right now it's mostly for the previs and a way to have a single source of truth that everybody can see and agree on throughout the lifetime of a project to delivery. There is a desire in the future, once we get like an API made, to have it actually be able to control installations. So it is like a live sort of digital twin of an installation or space that could have, all sorts of data fed into it about like, this many people in the room, this is the status of the computer running these projections. This is the like speaker that's activated, stuff like that. So there is definitely that desire in the future, and it could even connect to other 3D apps like Unreal or something actually running an installation.
Yeah. Did you always want to start your own business?
I always wanted to start my own studio. I thought that I was going to do that, and I think there's this crazy stat for architects and designers, like 50% will go on to start their own studio at some point or their own business, which I always thought was really cool. And it's funny, my co-founder Ian and I, we always joked about working together while we were in college, but we didn't really know exactly how we would do it. And then this kind of just Foveate appeared from that out of COVID. So we were really lucky in that way.
Yeah. So you and your co-founder went to college together. Does he do something similar? Did he have a similar background to you?
Actually, totally different. So Ian, his name's Ian Petrarca, very talented guy, super smart, love him, one of my best friends. We were actually freshman year dorm hallmates. So just a couple doors down, we were in the same dorm, and just happened to meet by dumb luck, in the hallway, and then became very good friends. And his background is actually in sound engineering. Although his father was a very good architect in New York, John Petrarca. So he does have like a design background in his blood, but not by training. Sound engineering was his major there at the music school. And then he's also had experience in web design ever since he was a teenager. So he has a really interesting background. And like I was saying, when the Oculus DK2 first came out, we both just like rushed to try at the same time. So we went there together to go try the headset, dude, and we were both like, wow, this is amazing. And for me, I was like, this is amazing for spatial design. For him, he was like, this is amazing for spatial audio. But we had like completely different, kind of use cases and interests when it came to what the affordances of VR were. And then really it was with COVID, we both had been using them at our jobs respectively. And he was also an experiential, more on the, commercial side, designing like permanent installations for, let's say like a theme park in Dubai or AT&T's headquarters down in Dallas or like Deloitte's lobby in New York, stuff like that. And those are usually more audio focused and on like, more enterprise level. And then they would use previs a lot too, and they had to deliver projects remotely during COVID. And it's when we realized, at that time is when we both realized, oh, the previs side is really the thing in experiential that is missing. It's so hard to explain these really complex, technically challenging, creative ideas in a way that a kind of like more normative, CEO or stakeholder can understand. So that's kind of where we made the realization and put two and two together that um, 3D. And we actually started off doing VR. So we thought like, oh, we'll do VR first, and because that's the most communicative of the platforms. But have recently stepped back and been like, okay, let's just start with 3D first,
Hmm.
because not everybody has a headset, right? And it's so hard to get people into it. Like you're saying, the convincing of people to actually, go get a headset and use it and set it up is quite challenging. So we should just start with 3D at first because
Yeah.
it's so accessible.
Yeah. And is Foveate live?
Yeah,
Live
so
and
it's
working? Yeah.
live. Totally live. Right now, we're just working with companies privately using it and kind of testing their use cases. And we also have a services division, which is what I run, which is called Foveate Labs. So that helps people create Foveate seamless 3D content, design installations for them. And we happen to use Foveate as the kind of design, review, exchange, presentation platform.
Hmm.
So we are using it. We eat our own dog food, is what they say in the startup world. Um,
What
so
does that
that
mean?
the,
You're testing it out yourself.
yes, yeah, that just means that you test it out yourself and you put it in your own scenarios so
Hmm.
that you can see, oh, is this feature that we're adding actually good? Does it actually help make the product better? Does it help communicate this idea more simply to someone? So working in that with customers that way has been really helpful because you just kind of realize, what do we actually end up using in the app and what can we kind of trim off and not need to develop anymore because it's not valuable to the user on the other end.
Yeah. What was your experience with the startup? You were telling me before we started recording about the accelerator. Can you describe to me like how that experience has been for you and how it's been going?
Sure. I mean, I'll just preface and say that when we first started this, we actually weren't a startup. We were an
Mm,
agency. So we were only executing service work for people with WebXR, so VR on the web, and 3D and augmented reality on Apple devices.
mm,
So it was kind of like a hodgepodge of like services, R&D, and creating experiences and different like 3D assets for people. And we did that for a couple of years until like 2022. And that's really when, honestly, we saw like AI pop up. And that was like the early
mm,
days of mid-turning where people are just like just getting started with Gen AI. And we were like, oh, dang, this is going to be a thing.
mm.
And we're only, us as the co-founders at that time, doing services work. So how are we gonna, compete with all this new AI stuff, right? And we kind of realized that we were really slow making custom 3D projects for people because we didn't really have like a solid pipeline.
Mm,
Unreal for the web like didn't exist or something like that. And we kind of realized we need a way to make our projects better. And that should be like some sort of easy to use tool where someone can just like upload a 3D model and it's on a link and shareable instantly. And then we realized that that has a ton of value for so many people in the world. And especially from our domain, you're right, of experiential. And,
mm.
and there was an opportunity to turn this into more of a product. So it kind of organically grew into a startup from more of an agency studio.
What's the
Um,
difference between an agency, studio, and a startup?
so I would just say for an agency and studio, it's more like you only execute services for people.
Hmm.
So you're going out and finding clients and trying to solve some sort of problem within your skill set, whether it's
Hmm.
delivering a virtual showroom, helping them with R&D, consulting, doing, let's say, creating a VR experience for them. So that's really more on the services side. You're executing a particular solution for people, more custom to their needs. And then for the startup, at least this is how I differentiate it. It's more of a product, right?
Hmm.
You're developing a product that is pretty static, and you can have multiple users from multiple different industries, and they're choosing to use your product in whatever way they choose, or however they see fit, for their use cases and their industry. So I would say that's the distinction that I make there. One is basically always custom with services, right? It's like no two projects are really the same.
Hmm.
And then with a product, it's like you're working on one thing for a really long time. And then that thing is ultimately what you're selling. But we're
Yeah.
still kind of weird because we do both. Like
Mm.
we do the services still and we do the product. And it just happens that the services uses the product in order to make the services better. So that's
Yeah.
kind of an interesting distinction that not all companies do. But I feel like, Epic Games and Unreal is kind of the same way. Like they make a product which is Unreal, I guess Fortnite's also a product, but they have a division. I forget what it's called now. I think it's called like Epic or Unreal Enterprise or something, and they
Yeah.
actually do services for people as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. I understand it. I can see what you mean by the difference. Um, and I want to ask you, like, what role do you think that AI will play in something like platform like Foveate?
Yeah, for AI, we're kind of skeptical about it in the sense that we're very cautious of how it gets applied. I think the kind of danger with a startup, and especially once you get into the tech world, is all the buzzwords, right? And
Mm,
marketers do such a great job of making something seem like the next big thing that everybody has to get into. And then companies who want to, keep their stock price up or they want to go raise money, they add the latest buzzword to whatever their company is to kind of make it seem more appealing. And we're not like that at all. We like to just think from the ground up, how do we make a good product that fills a certain need, solves a problem? And with AI, we don't think that adding a text prompt to the app is going to be that interesting.
mm,
So not just like adding chat GPT, like that's not that cool to us. But for us, we try to think about, okay, what is actually going to help people, solve a problem? How should that appear in Foveate? We take great pains to make our UI really simple and really intuitive. So we kind of rethought about how 3D apps should look. So Foveate has a very like immersive, minimal look. So for us, adding a little text box just for ads would kind of ruin the UI aesthetic.
yeah.
So I think the two most interesting applications of AI I see inside of the app is some sort of real-time render. The weakness of WebGL that people always talk about is like, oh, it can't look amazing. And we do lots of things in Foveate to make it look really good, like have post-processing like Unreal, have a library of HDRs that are super high quality in 8K. Have like anti-aliasing and tone mapping and like color calibration. But it would be really cool, I think, to have some sort of like AI render mode. And we've talked about this with some companies like Glyph that my friend Rishi runs that would be trained on path tracing. And then you could turn this mode on and be able to influence the lighting and like final render of your scene using, let's say, an image as the input. So that would take the lighting from the image and then apply that to everything on the final pixel level. So I think
Mm,
that could be really cool.
interesting.
But that's, probably years away,
Yeah.
at least a year or two at this point. Apps like Kriya already start to do that, but they're so inconsistent, it's not really usable for a designer.
Mm,
You kind of need to have the look the same for a client, right?
yeah.
So that doesn't work. But the AI tech that we think is super interesting that we actually have in Foveate right now is called Gaussian splatting,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of like have you heard of it before?
Yes, but can
Uh,
you explain it just
sure. So,
briefly?
for the viewers out there, Gaussian splatting is basically like photogrammetry, where you take a whole bunch of pictures from different points of view of a space or object. But the difference is, instead of a regular algorithm trying to match the features in each picture and construct a 3D model, an AI is being trained on that image set. It is constructing a 3D scene, in this case, a point cloud with splatting,
Mm,
from the imagery. And because it's AI reconstructing it, it can correctly reproduce the lighting and reflections from every point of view that you
mm,
captured in the 3D scene and fill in all the holes that would normally be present from areas that you didn't capture in
mm.
photogrammetry.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
So we support splats right now, and actually, if you use like Google Maps, and the new immersive view is a combination of photogrammetry models from Google Earth, and then when you go inside anywhere, one of those models, it is a Gaussian splat um, scan of a space. They sent someone to walk in and train an AI to recreate the interior of that space. So they're already using it. And then if you use the Vision Pro, the environments inside of there, I believe, are actually some sort of proprietary splat as well.
Mm,
So you'll have a 3D ground in front of you, and then it gets blended perfectly with kind of this splat around you. So it has kind of that high dynamic range look and feel that you would
hmm.
get from a splat versus a regular 3D model.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting also for the experiential design part of it because you can maybe create your worlds or, your spaces maybe quickly if you need to fill in a lot of gaps, right?
Right. So yeah, it would be super interesting to see that getting applied. Right now, it's only really used to capture real world spaces and
Mm.
then represent them as a Gaussian splat point cloud in a 3D scene. And now you see, other apps like Unreal, Unity, Play Canvas being able to upload splats and use them. It's such a new tech that we haven't really quite figured out um, in the
The
industry,
best
like
use.
the best use and how to put them into a pipeline and how to edit them, relight them, and stuff like that. But I do think something really interesting is going to happen with people who are in architecture and experiential, being able to capture their spaces and then make a really performant 3D model and then share them in Foveate or other apps and be able to basically have a photoreal model that is super optimized.
Mm.
And then on the flip side, I think, and this is something that I'm trying to like get the traditional 3D rendering apps like Chaos to do is like do more R&D into splats so that you could model your scene in Max, right? And then from their new apps like Eclipse or Vantage, be able to output a splat and have that real time ready Gaussian splat usable in whatever end pipeline or thing you want to do. So imagine like, let's say a virtual production scenario. You have an LED wall like they filmed The Mandalorian or that movie Gravity.
Hmm.
They put Unreal and they have the 3D model in there. Um, Normally you have to do a lot of work to recomp in like a path trace render in afterwards.
Hmm.
Like the LED walls are just used for the lighting, not always final pixel. But if you have a Gaussian splat that is photoreal, then you don't really have to do that anymore. Or if you have a VR headset and you want a photoreal capture of a real place, then you have that scenario as well. So I do think like that tech is just going to change the game when it comes to the transmissibility of 30 assets and
Hmm.
how realistic they look. But yeah, we're early days, right? We're super
Yeah.
early to this.
But that's an interesting take. I can understand why that area would interest you. Um, are you interested in the metaverse? I know we're coming to the
Oh
end of the
yeah.
conversation, so this is a
Mm.
big conversation started, but just a bit briefly, because it seems like Foveate and all the things that you've been interested in, kind of this must fascinate you in some way.
You would think, but I'm actually on the opposite side where
Okay.
I do think it's kind of overhyped and not really like a mission that I'm particularly interested in. And I say
Hmm.
this because when you actually try an experience that has tons of people in it, remotely. Also, I will say that we're not anywhere close to being to what a metaverse is, like just on
Mm.
a technology level. But I think when you are in a space with a bunch of other people who are rendered in a way that's totally different from who they are and there's no like accountability or identity to this person, it doesn't always produce the best behavior. It's kind of like on Twitter when you have people's anonymous accounts, right? They can say whatever, they can harass you, and there's no way to kind of like um monitor that or stop that. And
Mm.
I do think there's a big social aspect to the internet that's super helpful, but I honestly think that when you're meeting with people online, it's much better when it's like one on one like this or very small groups of people, kind of like the inner circle of friends and family. You don't necessarily want to meet with like 300 random strangers
Yeah.
inside of a video game world. I
Yeah.
mean, unless it's a game that, pertains to that, it's not, I don't know. I don't see what the value or the comfort or like the enjoyment is there. That
Yeah.
being said, there are lots of apps like VR Chat or Gorilla Tag that are super fun that people come into and they love. It's just not something that I see being in Foveate. I don't think people need their bodies in there unless they're fully rendered as you, Michelle, me as Kitae. We're actually inside of a space together talking about this thing that we're building. That
Yeah.
interests me a lot more.
Yeah, I think I see what you mean. Maybe the novelty excites people that it's possible to put a lot of people in a room, but like you said, like that doesn't actually interest probably a lot of people. Me too. In real life, I don't really want to be in a room with 300 people all talking at the same time, and I don't think I want that virtually
Right.
either.
It's like I think it's a beautiful kind of like idea that books like Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson like really
Mm,
popularized as like this fantastic game world where anything can happen. All of your friends are there. You can jump around, teleport anywhere, become anyone, wear anything.
mm.
Um, but it's like depicted better as fiction than reality,
Yeah, because I
right?
mean, it was very controlled. I remember. like in Snow Crash, it was kind of like, you know, the actual spaces, the actual like worlds that the character was in were actually sort of controlled, but in reality, that's not necessarily the case, you know.
Uh-huh.
So it wasn't like everyone was yelling at the same time necessarily.
Yeah, can you imagine if you were
Yeah.
just like in a 3D scene and there's in VR and you have like people running through your body screaming at you for like two
Yeah.
hours? I'd be like, this is torture.
I don't think I'd last 2 hours. I have a final question for you, Kite. What do you hope for the future of immersive experiential design?
Well, I have this idea or this dream, I guess, that our built environment just has experiential design everywhere in it. There's this kind of trend in Korea right now of cafes, and all the cafes are like super design and aesthetic, and it just becomes this kind of interesting thing. These third spaces that people can go to that are, very pleasing and have different vibes. Like some of them are more brutalist, some of them are more green, some of them are more fanciful. And I kind of want experiential design to just be everywhere in our lives. Like when we go in the world, so much of the built environment, just kind of normative stuff, or even things that you can't enter. And experiential design is this really interesting kind of like halfway point of art and architecture where you're in a space that's so curated, so designed, it really thinks about your mood and emotions. I hope that Foveate is a tool that kind of makes experiential design more common and makes it so that it's a part of a budget of everything. I was just talking with my friend Hansiet. She works at Pace, and she was showing me a team lab artwork, and it was so pleasing. This installation that had like spatial audio in it, that had these really cool graphics that were interactive of these plants growing, and we were talking about how that would be amazing to have in the hospital.
Mm,
So like these spaces that are typically kind of cold and clinical, it'd be amazing to have a more humanistic, humanizing, emotional space.
yeah.
And I think about a city like New York. How great would it be if there were just kind of like even micro experiential spaces that one could go to, say like cafes, where you buy a cup of coffee and inside it you have a completely kind of like emotional spatial experience that you can pick and you can stay there, like a listening room, for example, like a room full of 100 speakers, all,
Hmm.
and you can participate with people who are also into that thing. So I hope that experiential design just kind of disseminates. It becomes a part of culture. I
Hmm.
think America and many other places in the world are lacking of third spaces. I think experiential design can do a lot to make, let's say, the lobbies of your office actually be a cool place that you like walking into, making cafes more just kind of more different than just having a cup of coffee, actually a space that you can enjoy and kind of elevating, what we ask of our spaces. Right now,
Mm.
we kind of just design boxes, and occupy them. But I think there's so much more opportunity to, really kind of get into, at least for me, like why we got into architecture. Like, right, how do you make something feel in a
Yeah.
space? So
I
I
love
think that would
that.
make the world nicer.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really great thing to aim for and a very interesting like a very interesting sort of concept for our world. And I like that you've been thinking that big about it as well. It's great. Thank you so much for coming on, Kite, and thank you for like telling me about your experience. It's been really interesting. I feel like I have so many more questions about experiential design. I'm going to put the website for Foveate here in the link, but can you tell me the website for anyone who's just listening?
Sure, it's foveate.com. So Foveate.com.
Brilliant, and everyone should check it out. It's live, and you can sign up to use it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Oh, right now it's invite only, but
okay,
soon we'll do a public open beta.
that's
But
going to make it sound much more attractive to New Yorkers as well. Invite only, very exclusive.
it wasn't like intentional that way, but it's just easier, to manage. But
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, I'm very excited to see where that goes and where that takes you. Very
thank you so
exciting.
much for having me, Michelle. This was a
Yeah,
pleasure.
excellent. Thank you so much.